means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Saddiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit Basketball! Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me for the first time in the new year are both of my co-hosts, Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia. Fellas, it feels great to be back.
Is this really the first time all three of us have been here in 2023 into February?
I think so.
That's crazy. Well, hey, it's a good time for everyone to be together. It's our last podcast before the NBA trade deadline. The Pistons, one of the most talked about teams at the deadline. What will they do with Bojan Bogdanovic, Saddiq Bey, Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel? They've been one of those teams that's been brought up a lot, and I think something's got to happen at the deadline for Detroit. So this is going to be our final show to talk about all that stuff. We'll have a podcast recording right after the deadline next Thursday. So super stoked to have both of you here today and stoked to get into the discussion ahead.
Yeah, I'm hoping the Pistons aren't going to give us like trade deadline blue balls. That'd be rough. Basketballs, just to clarify for all our beautiful sponsors out there. I am hoping we're going to get something. I can't imagine that we will get nothing from the Pistons at the deadline. I mean, you literally are, as of right now, mathematically speaking, the worst in the NBA. I'm pretty sure non-mathematically speaking, you're still the worst team in the NBA regardless, but you have to do something at this deadline. How big of a move is going to be made, that remains less clear. Although, to be honest, most of the things that we're hearing as of right now, unless they are really good posturing, seems pretty certain that the big pieces are not going to be moving right now. So we'll see if that happens, but we got plenty to talk about this week.
We do. We have plenty to talk about. But before we get into all of that, I do want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from NFL playoffs, there's only one game left, to pro and college basketball, UFC, MMA, and more. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And with live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite leagues and events. Head on over to the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Again, a 50% welcome bonus. Just make sure that you use the promo code BLEAV, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit with BetOnline. Again, that promo code is BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Hey, can I say something real quick? I want to do this for the people that are getting in on this podcast early on Friday. I've got a bet for you, a Pistons bet for you. The line at BetOnline for Friday night's game between the Pistons and the Hornets, the over-under set at 241. Give me the over in that game. If you're listening, Pistons, Charlotte, the line is 241 for the total. I'll be playing the over. Play along with me.
Yeah, I like that. That's hard not to like. Two teams that play absolutely no defense and can both go off at any minute. I like that, Aaron. Okay. Aaron's lock of the week. I'm a fan.
I'm smelling a new segment.
Don't tempt me. I could talk gambling for too long. So don't tempt me. But that's my, you know what? BetOnline, gotta give them a look at this line. I think that, the Pistons and Hornets over those two teams. This could be 130 to 140. It would not shock me whatsoever.
Yeah, that's two bad teams that, like Jasper said, could just go off for points with zero defense played. That would make for an entertaining game to be at, actually, just to see a slug fest of two of the bottom dwellers. I think I would be cool.
The only reason this could maybe go under is because the Hornets are on a back to back, but I don't even care about that. These two teams, they don't play a lick of defense. They're bottom defenses in the NBA. They both play at a higher pace. Give me the over 241.
And Mike, that's very generous of you to call a Hornets Pistons game a slugfest. Unless, of course, you're John Beeline on the call.
I was going to say, calling them slugs.
No. I said slugfest. Slugfest.
I got to be honest.
Misheard me.
That feels so long ago. That feels like 10 years ago when that happened.
Yeah, it's almost as long as Michigan's been good at basketball. It feels like forever.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get back to another team that isn't playing that great at basketball, but we have to talk about them, and that's the Pistons. And our first topic for today is kind of a little, it's a little surprising because we were talking about Dwayne Casey and Troy Weaver on last week's podcast, but then all of a sudden, out of freaking nowhere, on Zach Lowe's The Low Post podcast, he believes that the Pistons front office is going to be under pressure to win games and compete for a playoff spot next season. He probably means play in spot, just kind of playoffs and play in together. But kind of striking out of almost nowhere that we have a major NBA name, NBA reporting name, I should say, indicating on one of the most well-known basketball podcasts that the Pistons are going to be under pressure to win games and compete for a playoff spot next season. And that's partially why the team is reluctant or hesitant or just flat out won't move on from Bojan Bogdanovic. We talked a lot about Dwayne Casey last week. Aaron and I are both on the same page that he should probably be let go after the season. This whole thing's kind of run its course. But Troy Weaver is also under pressure. And I said that he's not under the same pressure that Dwayne Casey is. But do you guys think he should be under pressure to win next season, or else he's going to be ousted?
Look, Go ahead, Jasper.
No, Aaron. No, you go first. You cook.
I have two opinions on this because I have what my opinion is, and I think I have what the organization's opinion is. And in my mind, there's no reason that Troy Weaver shouldn't be under pressure to put together a winning team next season. It'll have been his fourth season in charge of this team, a team that he has torn down and built the way that he has wanted to build it. Nobody has gotten in his way and said in regards to any player, you have to do this, you have to keep him. No one that we've heard of has gotten in his way regarding any sort of draft pick and said, you have to take this player, you cannot take this player. He has had cap space to work with now for multiple off seasons. And the Pistons, for all three of the years he's been the general manager, have been bottom of the league. There has to be some pressure. There just has to be a little bit of a sense of urgency from the organization, from the top guy, from the owner, Tom Gores. There has to be a sense of urgency of, if this is going to work with this guy at the helm, he has to start putting guys on this team that are going to lead to more wins. And to be honest with you, I don't feel that that's the case from within the organization. I think Troy Weaver already getting extended. They already are committing that money to him. If they maybe felt there was some urgency for him in that regard, I'm not sure they would have extended him this soon with another year left on his deal. So I don't think the organization is truly of the mindset that maybe Zach Lowe is indicating. He might be under pressure, but maybe not enough pressure to where if they don't, something is going to happen to his position. I think he's in a safe position after getting that extension. I don't necessarily think that should be the case. I think there should be some pressure that if, hey, you go 4 years without being able to get us at least in the play-in, then you might not be the guy. But on the flip side, you do also have to understand that lack of desire to essentially tear it all down again in terms of bringing in another general manager who potentially may not want to build with Jaden Ivey or doesn't believe in any of Troy Weaver's initial first-round draft picks, Killian Hayes, Saddiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart. I don't know. I feel like there should certainly be pressure. I think the lack of winning, the lack of on-court development, it's disturbing and it's unacceptable. I'm not saying the Pistons needed to be a playoff team this year. I'm not saying they had to win 45 games this year, but for them to look as bad as they have, not just in terms of their record, but in their on-the-court performance, the bad ways that they're playing the game, it's incredibly disappointing. And for as much flack as we have given Dwayne Casey, you have to look at the hand that he's been dealt and admit that Troy Weaver has not done a good job in giving him enough pieces, enough depth, enough top-end talent to win. So it's on both of them. And so if I'm going to say last week on the show that Dwayne Casey has to go, I can't omit Troy Weaver and say he's been fine. He has no pressure on him. He certainly does. He certainly should. I don't think the Pistons organization, though, is in a mindset of if we don't win next year, we may have to go a different direction with our front office structure.
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. And I think when you say it starts with ownership, you're on the right track 100%. Because since Tom Gores has come into this organization, he has said, it's been an edict, I'm trying to win games. I'm not really interested in the long-term rebuild. And obviously he was talked into it by Troy Weaver. But look, when the fact of the matter is you mostly forced Stan Van Gundy's hand in trading for Blake Griffin, and because you had that win now edict, you didn't tear down that team because you had that win now edict. And that's what cost ultimately Stan Van Gundy his job, even more so than the blown, draft picks and the free agent decisions. It was the Blake Griffin trade that ultimately cost him. And since you have given Troy Weaver this ability to tear down the roster and rebuild from the start, that doesn't mean that you can't that you can just continue to lose for half a decade and have no consequences from it. Let's be real. While I and you and Mike would be completely fine, and I think most of the fan base would too, with moving on from Dwayne Casey after this season, the Cade Cunningham injury probably bought him and Troy Weaver an extra year. And I would be very surprised if Dwayne Casey's not back next season. That being said, if they don't make the playoffs next year, I think he's gone. And if they don't make the playoffs the year after that, or they're underwhelming the year after that, they sneak in as the 7 seed, 8 seed, something like that, I think Troy Weaver's probably gone too, because you're going to have had 3 top 5 picks on this roster. It's inevitable. They're getting another top 5 pick this year, plus Jalen Duren. And while he's done a good job at rebuilding the roster to a certain extent, you're 100% right, Aaron. There's not enough top-end talent on this team in order for Dwayne Casey to really compete and really show what he can do as a head coach for a team that's trying to win, period. And he's done a decent job in the draft, yes, but it's not like he's nailed it. I mean, really, he took Killian Hayes over Tyrese Halliburton. He took Saddiq Bey over Desmond Bane. Those are, while they're not full-on busts, comparatively, they're misses. And so I think this is a big reason why the organization is saying, hey, we're probably not going to move on from Bojan Bogdanovic. And why Zach Lowe is saying as such is because there is absolutely pressure on them to win next year. And there should be. You can't just lose for half a decade and have nothing change organizationally. And yeah, I think Troy Weaver is smart to keep Bojan if that's his intention of winning playoff games next year. Because, look, this team needs talent, needs to hold on to its talent. They're going to get somebody that is really, really good in the draft next year, and they have to put something together. You can't just skate off the Cade Cunningham injury. You need to win games next season. Year 2 of Jaden Ivey, year 2 of Jalen Duren, year 3 of Cade Cunningham. You got to put something together, period.
See, and while we are in lockstep with this, we are in complete agreement. I'm not necessarily confident in Detroit's ability to make the playoffs next year. It's going to be very hard for them to win, call it 20 to 25 more games than they are going to win this year. I mean, they're going to be a 20-win team this year if they're lucky. At the rate that they're playing, it's going to be very hard to go from 20 to 22 wins maybe to like 40 to 45 wins to get into the play-in. It's going to be very difficult to do that. That's not something that most teams are able to do. And it's not like this is a rock star free agency class. And again, this roster doesn't have enough talent or depth to where you can feel confident that there's going to be enough internal growth to, even with a mediocre level free agency, that there's going to be enough internal growth to put together a good enough team to win. I mean, maybe they can be a play-in team, maybe, but again, who are they spending on in free agency? Who are they bringing in this year outside of that top draft pick that's going to really swing the tide for this team? Because it's not a good free agency class, and I just don't think it's all that reasonable to believe that this team's going to go from the 30th team in the league to a top 16 team.
I'll say this though, Aaron. Like, yes, you're 100% right with the free agency thing, and that's why earlier when they extended Bojan Bogdanovic, we were in favor of it, regardless of whether they decided to trade him or not, because this isn't a great, super deep free agent class coming up next year. And it's why I think we're probably in agreement. This is why you hold on to Bojan. I will say though, like year 3 of Cade, year 2 of Duren and Ivy, if you're bringing in knock on every piece of wood in your house right now, Victor Wembanyama or even Scoot Henderson, I do think that 10 to 15 games, it's realistic, because if you can just take that defense from the worst in the league to 17th in the league, you're talking about just an absolutely huge swing in your ability to win games. Like, if you can just have an average defense next year and keep some semblance of the offense you have, I definitely think you can win 10 to 15 more games.
I don't even necessarily disagree with you. I'm just concerned with the idea that, like, I mean, the top target Detroit's probably going to be linked to in free agency is someone like Grant Williams, who's going to be a restricted free agent. And it's like, is that going to be enough, getting someone like Grant Williams and, filling out the roster with a replacement for Corey Joseph?
Well, Aaron, they have just no wing defense at all. Yeah,
LeVert.
No, not LeVert, but I genuinely think somebody like Grant Williams would help. Yeah, would help a ton.
He would help for sure. I'm just skeptical that, how they could get both LeVert and Grant Williams. And I don't know. I mean, there would have to be so much internal development for them to go, take a 20-win jump.
But again, I think this just backs up what we're saying. There needs to be pressure on the team to improve. Like, that's right. Why there needs to be pressure to improve. Because if you're looking at this team going into year 4, year 5, and saying like, oh, we probably aren't like good enough to win 35 to 40 games in a league where things change so quickly. I mean, look at the Pelicans and the Lakers from when they made that Anthony Davis trade to where they are now. Like, how fast things change in such a short amount of time. So yeah, I think if you're looking at something like that and you're saying year 4, year 5, we're still not good enough to solidly make the playoffs, well, who does that fall on? It falls on the GM. It falls on the head coach. And it falls on the people that put the roster together. So I am 100%. I truly believe that, like, no, there are no free lunches. There's no free passes. Troy Weaver needs to show that he's capable of building a winner and not just making moves that, titillate Twitter fans, if we're being honest. Like, ooh, what a smart little trade. Like, yeah, that's cute, but at a certain point, you need to win games. And if you're not doing that, then you failed in your job.
I know that we're not giving Mike a lot of time to talk here, and I want to let him talk here. And I actually want him to answer this because I think his perspective as someone who's not necessarily as ingrained with the Pistons as we are is like, let's say someone like Chicago, for example, decides, okay, we've got to blow it up. We've got to move DeMar DeRozan. We're going to look at moving Zach LaVine. Like, is there pressure? Because again, this is where it would get easier for Detroit to make that jump, is if they can acquire a true all-star, star-level player through the trade market. Let's say guys like DeRozan, LaVine become available. Some of the other names, I don't necessarily know who they are. I don't know how many teams are going to look to blow it up this summer, this upcoming offseason. But should there be enough pressure to where Troy Weaver maybe has to look at the assets, the current guys on the roster, maybe someone like a Jaden Ivey, maybe the first round pick? I don't know. Is there pressure for him to look down the line and say, okay, maybe I have to put together some of my young assets, some of my draft capital, and go get a guy like Zach LaVine?
So before I answer that question, let me just go like 2 or 3 steps back. So the quote from Zach Lowe was pressure to win games and compete for a playoff spot. Let's say the Pistons are a 20-win team this year, just to make the math easy. A 15-win improvement would have been last year in the Eastern Conference would have been the 11th seed. Last year, the Knicks were 37-45. So even with huge, massive growth and the number of things that have to go right to even getting close to doubling your win total, yeah, you'll get Cade and you might get Scoot Henderson, you might get Victor Wembanyama, a Thompson twin, whatever the case is.
I mean, that's huge, though.
That's massive, but
that's huge.
So many things have to go right for that to even be a remote possibility. That's counting on growth. That's counting on, injuries not happening. That's counting on Wemby coming into the league and being a stud immediately. I mean, the Cavs were horrible, and they drafted LeBron James, and they didn't make the playoffs immediately. It's a different roster, and it was a different era. But I mean, Wemby's not just going to come in here and, wreck shop. I don't think he is an alien. But so having like a double win total year over year is super high bar to hit. That being said, there should be pressure on Troy Weaver, and I think that pressure starts now. I think trading Bojan Bogdanovic is not a win now move. It's kind of caving to, okay, let's keep collecting assets, keep collecting assets. And we've talked about this on a pod like a year ago. There is a point where you're going to have to consolidate. You're going to have to consolidate the stuff that you have. Maybe the stuff that you have sucks and isn't that good, but there is a point where you have to consolidate your assets. The Cavs just did this with Donovan Mitchell. They acquired the first round picks. They acquired, Colin Sexton through the draft. They made out with Lauri Markkanen. They acquired the pieces to consolidate all of that into a big move. And the Pistons are getting very close to doing, to having to have to do that as well. If they're going to want to compete, that point of consolidation is coming sooner rather than later. And it's why it's interesting if they do move on from Saddiq Bey, this trade deadline, which I don't think that they're going to do, but everybody has value within the league. And if somebody's willing to meet that value, the Pistons could pull the trigger. But there's a consolidation move that's going to happen. It's going to have to happen soon. It's going to have to. You can't continuously be in the acquire assets mode forever, because you're just going to continuously be in that for a long time. They have to consolidate that at some point. And I don't necessarily think that's next season. To answer your question, I don't know if a Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan's the guy that I'd be looking to consolidate assets for. But it's certainly a conversation that I think this front office needs to be having sooner rather than later. I think we're quickly approaching the point of, okay, we have these top picks. There's a foundation there somewhere. What can we consolidate to get a big name, come in and sort of glue some of these young guys together? I think we're approaching that point.
But I'll say this, if I'm Tom Gores, I'm looking at a team like the Cavs 2 years ago and saying, why can't we be that? Because that's the perfect example of a team that they didn't even make a trade for an all-star. They made a trade for Jarrett Allen. They brought in Evan Mobley. They got internal improvement from, yes, from Colin Sexton, sort of. That's not really, though, what it was. It was really Darius Garland going from being, oh, this guy's good, to being, oh, this guy's an all-star. And if Cade makes that kind of jump, you bring in a guy like Victor Wembanyama, who is, I mean, let's be real, like that's Evan Mobley on what steroids make you skinny and tall? I don't know.
It's Evan Mobley to the nth power, which is insane.
Yes, exactly. And like, if you could do that, well, okay, you don't necessarily need to trade for like a Zach LaVine. You need to trade for a guy that is maybe not yet an all-star, but is on his way to being there, or is at least somebody that is going to come in and like fix your roster holes, which in this case is wing defense. So that's why when you say, is Grant Williams going to make a huge difference? Yeah, I think I'm not saying that Grant Williams is a Jarrett Allen level player at all. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying if you can bring in somebody that fixes your wing defense, if you do get an all-star level leap from Cade Cunningham, if you do bring in a generational prospect, if I'm Tom Gores, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, why can't we be what the Cavs were? There's no excuse. If I'm ownership, at least, if I've given you 4 years, you need to make the improvement, period. And that's I think the bottom line.
Yeah, and if someone becomes available this offseason, I mean, there's no shortage of drama in the NBA. We can count on that every single season. There could be that player that becomes available, and it would be stupid for the Pistons to not consolidate their picks.
Let's say the Lakers blow it up and Anthony Davis is on the move, not to the Pistons, but to another team. There's no reason Detroit can't get involved like Cleveland did in the Harden trade and profit off of that. Right?
That's exactly right. And I think that that's probably best case scenario for this offseason is that somebody wants, or this deadline is that somebody wants to make a big move, like Toronto wants to blow it up. They want to move Anunoby, they want to move Siakam and build around Scotty Barnes. That's the kind of avenue where the Pistons could be a third team that helps facilitate some money or players moving around, and they could sneak in and grab something of value that they would not have had access to otherwise. So we're just moving right into trade talk, I think. And it's a good segue for actually, we took a break of it last week. We didn't talk about Bogdanovic being traded, but we have to go back to it this week because the deadline is fast approaching. And two pretty prominent NBA reporters have indicated that the Pistons are really not planning on moving on from Bojan Bogdanovic. Chris Haynes has said that Detroit's posturing like they want to keep him, and Mark Stein has indicated that the Pistons have no intention of moving Bojan Bogdanovic. So let's start with Bogdanovic. And to be clear, this is all sort of coming on the heels of a report from Hoops Hype. I think that's Mike. Who had that? Who had the sit down with Bogdanovic?
Yeah, Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype.
Mike Scotto did. Okay. Yeah. So Hoops Hype had a report about a conversation with Bogdanovic and Troy Weaver about the role that he's going to have next year, the excitement of having cap space to build the roster, having another high draft pick, getting Cade back, and how him getting injured really impacted things. Sort of a pep talk. I mean, it was a pep rally of sorts of, hey, this year sucks. We get it. But next year's it, baby. That's it. Pistons make the play-in, maybe, hopefully. So these reports of him, probably not being moved come as a result of some of those conversations. Let's start with Bogdanovic. Do we think that Bojan Bogdanovic is going to be moved?
I don't know. It seems like every report conflicts the most previous report to it. And I don't know. I mean, it sounded like Bogdanovic was going to end up staying. And then Chris Haynes came out and said Detroit's posturing like they want to keep him, meaning he really would still be available. But I don't know. If I had to put my money on it, I'm going to flip again from what I said last week when I said I think Bogdanovic is going to get moved. I'm going to flip, and I think Bogdanovic is going to stay. So when Bogdanovic gets traded on Thursday, everyone knows who they can yell at. It's going to be me. But I think he's going to stay. The recent reports, these people are obviously pretty well tied in. Mark Stein is one of the most tight end reporters in the game. Chris Haynes is tight in as well. It's not, any sort of not believing him or disrespecting his sources or anything like that. But Zach Lowe's sounded like the Pistons plan on keeping Bogdanovic. You have Stein saying it as well. And I think when you look at it, the Pistons need guys that are going to be contributors to them being more competitive in games. Bogdanovic has been the best healthy player on the roster this year. He's on a good contract. Said that so many times before. It's going to be very good next Thursday to not have to say it again one way or the other, no matter what happens. But it would make sense to keep him. I'm going to go with logic and say that Bojan Bogdanovic does not get moved by next Thursday.
Yeah, I think I've been consistent on this for most of the season. I think he's staying. I don't think they're moving him. There's for all the reasons that we've outlined and the reasons he outlined himself. They are at a point where they need to start winning games next year. And they're at a point where they don't have a ton of great options in the free agency market, although they definitely are going to have the cap space to go after the ones that they are interested in. And look, while I think you've been hearing a lot of NBA reporters saying, well, we expect Bojan to be moved because the Pistons are bad. I think it really is that. It's NBA reporters saying, well, the Pistons are bad, therefore I think they're going to move him. And that's the same reason I believe Chris Haynes said Detroit is posturing like they want to keep him. I really think a lot of the trade market, a lot of the trade talk that's come up around Bojan Bogdanovic has been driven by analysts and reporters' own personal opinions that bad teams should trade aging vets for picks because that's what you quote unquote should do. And for me, I look at it more from like a Moneyball perspective, which is what is the market inefficiency? And I think when you look at a player like Bojan Bogdanovic, look, if you're getting back a 20-something unprotected first round pick that is probably going to be a late lottery pick at best, I really think like the inefficiency there is the good player in this case. Like if you could get 2 more years out of Bojan that are really high level, where he's a really good scorer and a veteran presence and makes your locker room better, I think that has a lot of value to your team, more so than a late first round pick in a few years. Others might disagree, but I think that it's become kind of the conventional wisdom around the NBA, and I don't necessarily agree with it. So no, I think Bojan Bogdanovic is staying, and not only that, but to editorialize, I think it's a smart decision, and I support it.
I have flip-flopped on this as well based on all the reports, but I'm firmly now in the camp of he's not going to be moved. And, if these win now reports are true and that Weaver's going to be on sort of a little bit of a tighter leash heading into next year with some pressure to win, it would be a very not win next year move to trade Bogdanovic for a first round pick that I don't know if they have received an unprotected pick from somebody. But I think it would be a very not win now move if they were to just deal him. And it does go against the rhetoric of not moving and aging, but still good veteran for whatever assets a bad team can get. I think it bucks that trend, but it has to start somewhere. And if these rumors are true that this is what the Pistons are going to be doing next year, this is going to be the expectation next season, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to move him. So I feel like these reports also with two big names corroborating that, I feel like that has more legs to it than usual.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. When it comes to the Pistons organization, they're pretty straightforward about like what their intentions are. With Jeremy Grant last year, and even really the year before, there was never any talk of like, oh, the Pistons are saying they're going to keep him. No, they always were like, yeah, he's available. Like we'll think about extending him if we don't have the right, a deal on the table. But like, nah, he's available. They're not doing that with Bogdanovic, and I don't really know why they would change up their strategy now. That to me doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think even more so if you look at the history of this organization, all signs are pointing to him staying.
So what about Saddiq Bey? There was a report that said the New York Knicks were interested in Saddiq Bey, underperformed, moved to the bench, inconsistent, the usual characteristics that we've seen from Saddiq throughout his career in Detroit. This is a little more interesting to me. I still don't think he's going to be moved, but the Knicks are an interesting team. And, as Tim Forkin had mentioned in our Palace of Pistons chat, that if you can get back your first round pick from the New York Knicks, then, maybe that's worth considering. That's another potential consolidation opportunity with having multiple first round picks. You could cash those in for players if you're looking to do that next year to try to have a more win now roster. But Aaron, what do you think about Saddiq Bey and the reported interest that the Knicks would be open to acquiring him if that price is right?
Well, I think, and this goes back to our discussion that we had a few weeks ago, when you look at the future for the Detroit Pistons, the future cap decisions that they're going to have to make payment decisions on Bey, on Killian Hayes, and Isaiah Stewart sooner rather than later. And for me, Saddiq Bey is a guy that, especially with him playing a little bit better over the last couple of weeks, that value maybe trickles up a little bit more. And that's a guy that I wouldn't mind the Pistons moving if they can get a first round pick for Saddiq Bey. I would live with that. I don't think the Knicks give that up, but it wouldn't be the worst move because I still don't believe Saddiq Bey long-term is anything more than a scorer off the bench. He's played better. He's looked okay, back in the starting lineup a little bit because of injuries. But long-term, there's just too many things that get in the way of him being good enough to be more than a bench scorer. He doesn't defend well. Not the hopeful, hereditary type distributor that we were maybe hoping he could be last season when he started in the second half of the year to become more of that. That's gone away from his game. And the shooting is just, it's just not there from beyond the arc. He's gotten better at getting to the rim, drawing fouls. But overall, I don't think he has enough upside. Whereas a guy that I don't want to move like Bogdanovic is, we know what he is, we know what he's good at, and we know what he's under contract for. Saddiq Bey isn't on any of that stuff. And if you can get a first round pick that, if you do end up trying to consolidate assets and move them for a star, you get that extra first round pick to work with. Like, that helps. Heck, even if you can get someone like a Quentin Grimes, who, I don't think New York would move for Saddiq Bey, but I've seen it tossed around. I don't think it happens again, but a good shooter, not a bad defender, has showed a little bit of some ball handling stuff, really excelled in the summer league, and has earned a spot in New York's rotation, which is very tough to do under Tom Thibodeau. I don't know if maybe Detroit tries to get Cam Reddish in this type of a situation. That was a player that they were linked to a lot last year. One of the trades that I had seen from someone on Knicks Twitter was like Ryan Arcidiacono and Svi Mykhailiuk. Now, if that's the price, if that's the value on Saddiq Bey, I would just say, keep him. That's not a trade where you're losing a roster spot and everything. for two guys that aren't as good as Saddiq Bey. Like, that's not something I'm interested in. But yeah, I mean, if you can get a first round pick, if you can get one of these guys like a Quentin Grimes, like, I would say absolutely do it. I don't think New York is giving that up. But Bey is not a guy that I'm as tied to as someone like Bogdanovic.
I mean, the Knicks, for me, that's not a super appealing trade target. I think the idea that you're going to get a first round pick from them, the only way I could see that happening is if it's kind of a similar deal to the one that actually brought Bey to Detroit, where you're making like the Luke Kennard trade, where you're moving, multiple second round picks along with him for a late first. That's kind of like the only thing I could see happening there. And even then, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is Saddiq Bey worth as much as Luke Kennard was at that point? Is he?
I don't know.
I don't know either. So, I mean, if you're getting back a player like Quentin Grimes, yes, I'm interested because he helps you out big time with your, defense in terms of guard defense. I'd love him coming off the bench for Detroit. I think he's a really good defender. I like what he brings to that team. I mean, look, if you're a second-year player playing 36 minutes a night for Tom Thibodeau, you're doing something right on the court. You're a pretty smart player. So, or you're Taj Gibson. But
right.
No, I think that. Sorry, I said second-year player, not 20th-year player. But I think when it comes to the Knicks, I mean, I'm not interested in Cam Reddish. I'm so past the hype with him. He's nothing to me. He's like a Kevin Knox level player. And Obi Toppin, whatever. This just does not really interest me. The Knicks don't really have anything that I'm interested in, unless, of course, it is a first rounder, in which case that would be nice. But you're also probably going to have to give up something else on top of Saddiq Bey in order to pull something like that off. So I don't necessarily see it happening. I just think he's one of those players where it's like, he's too valuable to you to trade him for what he'd be valued for other teams, if that makes sense. Much like Luke Kennard, to be completely honest. So unless you're, really committed to moving on from him and bringing in somebody new, I have a hard time seeing Saddiq Bey getting moved.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't think they'll get equal value back for him, and that's just how it's going to be with a young wing that has had a floating sort of role the last couple of years. He either shoots the ball super well, looks super involved, or he's ice cold and he's ice cold for 2 weeks and you just don't know what you can do with him. You have to staple him to the bench. So I'm not interested in Cam Reddish either. Apparently the Cavs and the Mavs are interested in Cam Reddish. I don't like that at all. As a Cavs fan, I don't understand the infatuation with him. It's not even worth talking about. I'm not interested in that. I would be more interested in Obi Toppin, but you're not going to get a first round pick with that. You're going to get Toppin and slight maybe second round pick, or something else pretty light. And I'm not super interested in Obi Toppin either. He's just not the kind of player for me. The fit's just super weird, and if he was good, he would be playing more for the Knicks. He's had a weird role there almost.
Oh, Mike, you don't think the Pistons need another limited power forward on their team? Oh, wow, shocking.
Call me crazy, but I don't think that they do. Call me crazy. So yeah, I mean, I think they're going to keep Bey, and they're not going to get the value that they're hoping to get from him. So they just have to keep him and see what happens. And we'll get into contract talks in a different future podcast. But for right now, see what comes the rest of the season. But now, what about the vets on this roster? Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks. There's been some reluctance to move Alec Burks. He's a good vet, can score the basketball. There's no question about that. The bench at the beginning of the season was horrible, and then immediately flipped the script when Alec Burks came back and was healthy. I think he's a valuable vet in a similar but not the same way that Bogdanovic is for next year. If you want to be a decent team and have some depth, I think you have to keep Alec Burks. Jasper, what do you think? Noel, he's been linked to the Mavs. He's been linked to a couple of teams as a rim protector, as a veteran sort of rim protector. I know there was a report a couple weeks ago about, him wanting to move on. The Pistons would, try to help facilitate a move if one came around. What do you think about Noel and Alec Burks?
Yeah, I mean, with Noel, I love the idea of trading into the Mavs. If you could somehow get Reggie Bullock back, I doubt it, but that'd be amazing. I mean, they're still throwing JaVale McGee out there right now, and he'd definitely be an improvement for them at that position. I do think there's other teams too that you could potentially make something work, but if they don't, I really think he's a buyout candidate after the deadline. If they can't figure something out, maybe it's even just like a second round pick. He's not playing for them, so it's hard to convince a team to give up a legitimate asset for a player like that. I definitely think you could get something for him though. With Alec Burks, I've been consistent on him too. Same with Bojan. I'm not really convinced that the right move is to move on from him. I don't think you're getting a first round pick back. I don't really know what kind of quality of young player you'd be getting back for him either. So I think when I look at it, not even like for this year and for next year, I think Burks is a player that absolutely can have a role on this team. Look, people have been maligning the fact that Killian's gone to the bench, but since Burks has entered the starting lineup, Pistons starting lineup has a net rating of 7.2. So they've been better with him in the starting lineup. He provides a little bit of playmaking. He provides a lot of consistent scoring, which is something that they don't have with Ivy or Killian Hayes. And even next year, who's to say where Ivy or Hayes will be at that point? And who knows who you're bringing into the draft. So there's absolutely a chance that Alec Burks is still going to have a sizable role on this roster next season. And if he doesn't, well, you can trade him then. I think they're going to pick up his option. They've said they want to pick up his option. And for $10 million, I think it's a very reasonable price for a player of his quality. So I don't think he's getting moved. I think Nerlens Noel is. Aaron, I'm kind of interested to hear what you think on this one, because I think the Burks one, even more so than Bojan, is very much like really up in the air, because if they do end up drafting Scoot Henderson next season, well then if you have Ivy and Cunningham and Hayes also on the roster, there's really nowhere for Alec Burks to play at that point. So, I'm interested to hear what you think there. Is it better that they hold on to him now and see what happens in the offseason? Or should they just say, hey, his trade value is probably the highest it's going to be while he's with the Pistons. This is the time to strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, I mean, if that happens, in the offseason, the Pistons end up with Scoot Henderson, it probably does mean you have to trade him. But I don't think you're getting a first-round pick for Alec Burks now. And if you want later, it doesn't really matter. I don't think the value for him now is that much higher than it will be in the offseason. I don't think a team is giving up a first-round pick for Alec Burks. But to your point, I know people were complaining left and right about, oh, wow, look at what the Pistons have done to the roles of Killian Hayes and Isaiah Stewart. But what does it say that the starting lineup has looked better with Alec Burks in it, with Saddiq Bey in it instead of those guys? I mean, Alec Burks has performed well all season long, and whether, it's not like it's some lock that Scoot Henderson is going to be a Piston next season. So if he's not, Alec Burks is your best guard off the bench once again, and he's very valuable for the contract he's on. He brings enough to this team to where $8 million, $9 million that he's really isn't all that much money, because what he brings for you on a nightly basis, a steady hand at the backup guard spot, is really, really important. And we've seen what a steady hand in the starting lineup has done for that group. So, I don't think he gets moved, because I don't think a team's coughing up a first-round pick. He's kind of in that same category of Bogdanovic, albeit to a lesser extent of, if you want to be trying to win games next year, Alec Burks is probably one of the few guys on this roster right now, especially that's coming off the bench, that's going to help with that. So you would want to keep him. Noel, I don't know what his value is. He might be throwaway, for a top 55 protected second round pick type of deal at this point. It doesn't really matter. Detroit has no inclination to want to keep him. Noel seemingly doesn't want to be here either. It was said that the two sides agreed working to find him another home is the ideal resolution. So imagine he gets moved. Imagine it's not worth really anything for Detroit with that being considered. But yeah, I don't necessarily think Detroit should be searching out a deal for Alec Burks if a team really wants to overpay for him, which is what the reports have been. It's been the Pistons aren't looking to move Alec Burks. It would take significant draft capital from a team overpaying to get him for Detroit to move Burks. And I think that's the exact mindset that the Pistons front office should be operating under, because it's very telling that Alec Burks has been, as good as he has this year, no matter what role he's played, when maybe the hope was that he wouldn't have to be potentially the best healthy guard on the roster this year.
Something that's insane, because I wanted to go look at the on-off stats for Alec Burks. Alec Burks on the floor this year, the Pistons have an efficiency differential of plus 11.3, which is the 96th percentile when Alec Burks is on the floor. He has an expected win value of plus 24 in just 867 minutes for the Pistons. The offense is obviously significantly better. Points per possession is in the 95th percentile. This is all according to Cleaning the Glass. Pistons are dramatically better with Alec Burks on the floor. I hope they don't move on from him. Because again, if you're looking at next year, you're going to need vets on a very young roster. And if you are looking to make the playoffs or bust, then you're going to really need vets who can come in, stop the bleeding when you need it. And, just be honestly, just veterans who are consistent and can bring that, every night. So Alec Burks, super valuable. I think if they don't find something for Noel, they may just buy him out. Like Jasper said, I think, he's a vet. He's been around a while. If he asks for his release to go join a contender to wrap up the season, he's probably earned that right. So they could just buy him out ultimately.
No, I mean, look, you're 100%. Look, I said it on Twitter the other day when people were, oh, why is Killian going to the bench? Look, man, there's 3 healthy guards on this roster right now. Ivy, Hayes, and Burks. And of those 3, Alec Burks is not number 3 in terms of who the best player is right now, right? Like, I know you don't want to hear it, but, like, it's true. He's good. He's probably the best one of them right now.
Well, that was going to lead to my next question is, this will be our last topic and then we'll wrap up, on the subject of guards. What, just real quick, what grade would you guys give Jaden Ivey so far?
C, B minus. I mean,
I was thinking B minus.
He's certainly not exceeded expectations. He's kind of inconsistent. He's been very average for me this year. It's not necessarily like super disappointing. It certainly becomes a lot harder for him without Cade Cunningham on the court, playing with someone like Killian Hayes, who the defense doesn't have to lock into as much, isn't really game planning as much for if they would have had to guard Cade Cunningham, for example, in difference, whereas Ivy can maybe excel off of teams having to zone in on Cunningham a little more. I certainly think that that's hurt him in that regard. But at the same time, like, the defense is something that is a major, major issue that, again, whether people want to believe it or not, it has to be fixed or it's going to hold the Pistons back long term. If you watch Jaden Ivey for a full stint, a full game, and really focus on what he's doing on that side of the court, you might actually realize why I've been talking about that more and more lately. He does not compete on that side of the floor nearly enough. And it's a problem for this whole team, for the entire Detroit Pistons group. But it really stands out when Ivy, who's one of the fastest, probably the fastest guys on the court every night, one of the most athletic, is just getting beat off the ball, beat to the rim, gets his hips turned every single time he's the primary defender. It's concerning, and that's the biggest reason. His efficiency numbers have been inconsistent. The shot selection isn't always perfect, but his lack of competing on the defensive end, the way he's getting blown by, the way he's getting picked on, the way he's getting exposed on that side of the floor. Again, whether you want to believe it or not, because there are people that disagree and want to put it on other people, it's a real problem. And if you don't believe me, just focus on him for a game and see what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason they're the worst defense in the league. Like, you know what I mean? It's not all on Isaiah Stewart. Jeremy Grant's a really good defender, but he wasn't the only reason why they were a decent defensive team last year. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear he's largely what we expected him to be. Great athlete, super inconsistent, still figuring it out. I think that he has been better shooting the ball than I expected, not just from like outside, from 3-point line, but I think also in the mid-range, especially over the last few weeks. I think he might be taking a few too many of them, but I do like to see that it's a part of his game. I think that his passing's come along better the last few weeks as well, but 100%, Aaron, the defense is so bad. I didn't expect him to be a good defender, but I expected with his size and athleticism for him to at least create some chaos. Like Hamidou Diallo is a really good example of a guy who's not a very good defender in terms of his fundamentals, but he's so active and he creates so much chaos in passing lanes and on the ball that he's able to make up for his deficiencies in other areas on that end of the floor. Whereas Ivy is just doing nothing. You said it. It's the compete level. The compete level is not high enough for him right now. And we've discussed Killian Hayes regressing defensively. I think a big part of that has to be the fact that he's playing next to Jaden Ivey instead of Cade Cunningham this year, or even Corey Joseph, for God's sake. So, yeah, B-, C+, something in that range seems about right to me. He hasn't been bad, and I think that's really crucial, but he hasn't been exceeding expectations by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. Either. I just wanted to see your thoughts. We haven't really talked about Jaden Ivey. We talked a lot about Jalen Duren throughout the last couple of months and just his growth and impact on this team, but not so much about Jaden Ivey, and the inefficiency is there. For sure.
To be clear, if we weren't grading on a scale here, he'd be a D. Like, he has not been a good player, but we're talking about in the context of him being a rookie on this team, it's a B-. Like, overall, his play, it's bad. It's bad. It's not good. And we have to acknowledge that. For a rookie, he's been good, though.
Okay. All right. I just wanted your guys' thoughts on that before we wrapped up. Since we're talking about guards and Alec Burks and the ranking of our current healthy guards and how it's a little bit on the dire side of things. And yeah, there was a little bit of flack for Killian heading to the bench, but that's maybe for another podcast. So we'll just skirt right over that.
Well, let's see what lineup Dane Casey decides to throw out next week. So, that might
let's
change.
Let's see what the landscape of the NBA looks like at this time next week after the deadline has passed and everybody's been moved, and see if the Pistons were able to get in on any of those deals as that nasty third team that could scoop in and pull up an asset or two. Guys, anything before we wrap up this edition of the podcast? First time we've been able to all get together for quite a while. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a nice return to norm.
Yeah, it's been good. I'm glad all three of us were here. I always think it invokes the best conversation and debate. I guess I'll share one more thing. Just one prediction for the trade deadline. Biggest name to be dealt, I'm saying it's going to be OG Anunoby. That's probably the popular pick. but he's in so many trade talks. One thing I'll add to that is OG Anunoby really worth 3 first-round picks? That seems like a lot of first-round picks for a non-all-star level wing. I get he's a good player. He's a phenomenal defender, but that's a lot of draft capital for him.
I know. I said the same thing, man. I'm like, that's a Drew Holiday deal, man. Is he okay? I mean, if you think he's going to have the kind of impact that Drew Holiday had on that Bucks team, I guess. But for me, he's not that kind of player. I'm with you on that, Aaron. So I think you're probably right. Just for fun, I'll throw out another guy to get traded. I'm going to say, I'm literally making it up off the top of my head. I'm going to say that Michael Porter Jr. is going to be traded for absolutely no good reason at all.
Just the first thing that came to my head.
Yeah, it really was. But you know what? Live dangerously, my friends. Don't put that one on. Don't bet on that one on Bet Online, though. I'll say that.
That would be that would be awesome. Tim would be going absolutely insane.
They got to open up more minutes for Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown's got to be in the starting lineup. Maga Porter Jr., he's out of there.
Hey, apparently Christian Wood's back on the market. I know a team that
that's true.
Him.
Oh yeah, Christian Wood for Nerlens Noel. Straight up, who says no?
Dallas was interested in Noel, so
that's true. There we go.
Let's make it happen. All right.
Okay. I like the little silly ending. Boy, if MPJ gets traded, chef's kiss. I love it. I am here for the chaos. And we hope that you'll be joining us next week as we discuss all of the hopeful chaos. The trade deadline will have passed this time next week at the time of this recording, at least, and we'll be back to break it all down, see if there's any impact on the Pistons, see who got moved or who didn't get moved. And boy, if no one on the Pistons gets moved, it might be like a 14-minute podcast or something really short like that. So hopefully they dish out something, and hopefully that you'll be joining us to listen to us break it all down, give our thoughts on it. Can't believe we're already at the deadline and then the All-Star game. It feels like the season's moving awfully quickly. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. Again, shout out to our sponsor this week. That's Bet Online. And if you head on over to Bet Online and use your phone or go right on to the website, join, receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit with Bet Online using the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. So thank you again to Bet Online. For my co-hosts, Jasper Apollonia and Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. We will see you all next time.